People who had undercover cops come to their school posed as fellow students. How did you know? One guy who looked like he was 23 but claimed he was a sophomore moved in mid-semester. He immediately started asking every guy with hair longer than a buzz cut or who wore a band or concert t-shirt where he could score some drugs. I don't think he busted a single kid, but he was so obvious it was a little pathetic. He asked a guy I knew who actually was a druggie and dealt on the side where he could get some drugs. But my guy just told him to say no to drugs, man. That's a bad scene. Don't ask me again or I'll turn you into the principal. How do you do, fellow kids? There's gonna be a lot of that today. Next story. Sort of related, but Indiana has excise police to control underage drinking. In practice, that means that the cops gather up some college girls that got in some minor trouble or something and offer them to be informants in exchange for better sentencing. So it was common enough on campus for a group of hot girls to try to get into fraternity houses to snitch on underage drinking. Every semester, we had to educate new members that no, it's not normal for a group of 5 attractive women to knock on the door to ask to use the bathroom. That just doesn't happen. Don't let them in. A sudden group of attractive women begging to be invited in. We don't know for sure that they were snitching. Okay, they might have been vampires. Next story. We had a guy in jeans and a blazer come to our high school to give us a talk about how dangerous drugs were. This was like right after Dare had crashed and burned and everyone treated it as a joke. He introduced himself as a drug awareness expert and tried to be casual and real and not like those Dare cops from elementary and middle school. Someone asked him if he was a cop and he kind of fumbled around and said that wasn't really an important question. Someone else then asked if he was a cop, and he kind of gave up and said, yes, but that didn't affect the seriousness of drugs being bad. Next story. The first one was outed by a TA who overheard the narc asking where to score some drugs. She just laughed and said it would be easier to get it free from any of the guys at the 7-Eleven parking lot and that nobody was going to be selling anything to narcs. Well, the narc got upset with her and switched to asking at the gym until he got run off by the basketball coach. The second one got himself in trouble trying to buy some drugs from the school ripoff artist, ending up with a 5-pound brick of lawn clippings and oregano. Local cops came to the gym for a month straight visiting us with new and mandatory drug awareness seminars. Most of us just caught up on our studies and played D&D until they figured out that we didn't care enough. Wasn't there a bit about this in the old sitcom Third Rock from the Sun, where he's embarrassed to be learning how to cook and they find his oregano and goes, no, I swear it's weed. Hey, a 5-pound brick of oregano, that stuff goes quick. Next story. Way back in the late 60s, this guy named Bob in my history class, he was very low-key, rode a motorcycle, hung out with the party-hardy types but didn't seem to drug. Had a bit of a crush on him, I admit. It was late October, so not that far into the school year. He was a new transfer in our senior year. I went to a party in a house out in the country with a friend who heard about it from a friend, etc. It was immediately apparent it was a much rougher party than either of us, teenage girls, 17 and 18-year-olds, expected, and I saw Bob. He came over immediately and quietly told us we probably should go home. It wasn't our kind of party. He offered to have his girlfriend drive us. Weird, but we went away. The party was busted that night. About 6 people were arrested. It was a big deal. Bob was not one of them. The high school students were taken to the police station for their parents to pick up, I think, and I never saw him again. Next story. Very small town in Wyoming in 1992. The story made the news because the undercover cop, who I believe was 25, hooked up with a 15-year-old and ended up in jail. They did attempt to bring charges against some of my friends for drug possession, but they were dropped because said cop was supplying the drugs and committing statutory SA. It did not help their case either. Next story. I was just out of high school working at like my 3rd job ever, cold calling for donations to the McGruff THR Crime Dog organization. I looked like a huge stoner. So one day this guy starts working there, and he was like every undercover cop stereotype rolled into one. Cop mustache and everything. Hey man, you know where I can get some weed? Total fellow kids vibes. He kept trying to be my buddy and I just brickwalled him every time. I quit the job, mostly because I didn't want to get arrested, but it effing sucked anyway. Next story. We had an exchange student come over from England. He was 16 but had a full beard and looked 30. We all knew he was a narc. Nope, just a dude who won the hormonal race in high school. He ended up moving back here after he graduated and owned a bar for a while. 100% a good dude.
Right, I've bloody sweared 40 times now, I'm not a narc.
Poor guy didn't get invited to any of the parties just for a good sweet beard. Next story. Guy looked in mid-20s, balding up on top, and asked everyone where he could buy some pot. The whole thing was ridiculous. It was 1977 in a small town with about 115 of us in the high school. One girl was convinced he was just shy about asking her out, and that's why he kept asking for it instead. The charade lasted maybe 2 full weeks. Then he was suddenly spotted in a uniform driving a cop car around. He never found any drugs to buy, and there was plenty. Next story. I don't think people knew. In 1996, the classes got locked down, and they started pulling kids from class. Turns out, there had been 2 undercover cops posing as students. One male, one female, for a couple months trying to sniff out the drug dealers. The kids pulled from classes had sold drugs to the undercovers on the public high school property. 20 or so kids were arrested. Or maybe we just didn't know any better? This was a quote from the article I just found, from someone that realized they had sat next to him in class.
He seemed to be a normal high school boy, except he appeared too mature to be a junior. He said he was held back a couple of years because he said he grew up on a farm and he was homeschooled.
She said. Next story. They used really short women, like 4'11", but clearly in their late 20s and 30s. Also, wouldn't do the assignments in class. They also dressed like country cowboy girls, but the country scene in my town was mostly just getting hammered on the weekend and couldn't afford drugs. So the only main dealer in the school knew right away who they were. This is where the story gets sad. Lacking any convictions, the undercover agents went after the special ed kids. Not the nonverbal or disabled, but the kids that were at the time classified as SLD. Not a lot of friends, low-level autism, etc. Eve, the girl who struggled to make friends, suddenly had this cool person wanting to be their friend. Now these kids had controlled substances, their prescribed medications. Now these moderately attractive and friendly girls are wanting to hang out with them and eat lunch with them. After a while, they ask for a couple of pills. Then a few weeks later, these kids are being slammed to the ground by SWAT at lunch in front of everyone. I heard in the end a lot of the charges were dropped. I don't think much of it now, but I'm in my 40s, and I have a low-level autistic daughter in 2nd grade that excels in school but struggles to make friends and is lonely. I can't imagine the betrayal I would feel toward my local police if they tricked her like that. She would never recover, and trust issues would follow her for years. Anyways, that effing radicalized me. The main dealer at school? Last I heard, he was the #1 Ford dealer in our state, possibly manager by now. Oh, that sucks. That is really sad. I hope that didn't leave too much lasting damage for those kids. And how about the actual dealer, huh? Went from selling keys to, selling keys. Next story. He looked 30, was about 6'5", and dressed like he was trying to be an undercover cop, and asked everyone he met if they had drugs. He asked me once, and I said no. He then said if I could get him some to meet him at a local pool hall on a Saturday at noon. I said sure, and walked away. 6 months later, I had a DEA agent talking to my parents saying I had agreed to meet him for a drug deal, and they set up a sting operation to catch me with a full undercover police presence taking over this pool hall like you would see in a movie. I was charged with attempt to distribute even though I didn't show up and I didn't have drugs. Oh, that's crap, man. If I knew somebody was an undercover cop and he was just like, do you have any drugs? Do you have any drugs? Do you have any drugs? And he kept bothering me, I would probably Bugs Bunny him like that too. Like, drugs? Yeah, you know what? Sure. Meet me at the pool hall, okay? And then I wouldn't go. That's not fair. And also kind of insulting. You're like, yeah, I knew he was an undercover cop. I was just saying that to get him off my back. Next story. Didn't have a cop, but we had an undercover journalist. She had this really suspicious thing going with the English teacher. They rode the Ferris wheel together when our school threw a huge carnival, and they went to some reggae nightclub. Anyway, it was all really weird and came to a head when she delayed our school's baseball championship until he met her on the pitcher's mound to kiss her. I think she went to Northwestern. I'm not cultured enough to know if this is a reference to a show or a movie, but it has to be. Next story. My biology teacher ratted her out. She mentioned to the class on several occasions that there were undercover cops working in the school. One day, she mentioned it and turned to a girl in the class and said, "Like you, Marlena." My teacher pretended she was joking, but Marlena turned beet red and was obviously uncomfortable. She never returned to school after that day. I always found it odd because she was super smart and hung out with all the band nerds. I would have suspected she would have tried to get in with the stoner crowd. I guess just having there to observe was helpful to them? Woof. That's quite the accident. Unless, of course, it wasn't an accident at all. For I know of a certain chemistry teacher who broke bad, who's to say a biology teacher didn't do the same. I know the subjects don't actually make it, just, you know what, don't throw logic into it. Next story. Didn't come to the school, just moved in 2 houses away from me. I was the typical 14-year-old skater boy. Everyone knew what I was into, but they could never catch me with anything. Anyway, one day some fine girl moves in a couple houses down. Gets my attention immediately. Never said a word to each other for months. One day she stops me as I was skating past and asked me if I wanted to smoke. I was actually out at the time, but she was cute, so I was like, of course, let's go. So we smoked one and introduced ourselves. Got done, she said I could keep the roach since I didn't have any of my own at the moment. Everything was fine. Few months go by, she comes knocking on my door after I got home from school one day. Says her guy is out of state for the next few weeks and asks if I have anything I could sell her. I tell her no, I don't sell, because I didn't, but I can go get her some if she is willing to front the cash and smoke with me when I get back with it. She says, yeah, that's fine. Gives me $60 and I tell her, okay, I'll be back. I call one of my Connex, set up the meet, jump on my bike and go get it. Got her over 8 grams of kind bud for $60. I bring it back. She says, oh crap, something just came up and she has to leave. I'm so sorry. But she gives me a huge bud from the bag. Okay, cool, whatever, no big deal. Like 7 months go by. They show up with a felony 5 warrant for drug trafficking. They waited until the very next Friday the 13th to come get me. Not even kidding. Turns out I had been followed. They got everything on camera. I go to court, judge, magistrate, but same thing, tells me the charges and the evidence. 0.03 grams. 0.03 grams is what the evidence was. I told my lawyer, what the F happened to the rest of it? I got her way more than this. What the heck is going on here? Anyway, long story short, I took the plea bargain for misdemeanor possession instead of risking a felony and got 2 years probation with weekly urine tests. So yeah, that was fun. Man, I've had one heck of a life. Best part is now it's all legal here 20 plus years later, so what an absolute joke. Next story. Not a school one, but we had an undercover cop join our company as a production supervisor. A few things that struck me as weird. Spent a lot of time socializing in his office, which was on a main hallway rather than be on the production floor. He seemed overly interested in company scuttlebutt. His shoes. He wore black dress shoes that didn't go with the rest of his clothes. I was laid off at about the time it became known that there was an undercover cop at the company, but before he or she had been identified. Some people speculated it was me just because I was usually a bit more formally dressed than my peers. I found it hysterical. Nope, just a bit more dressed up in order to be taken more seriously as a short female engineer in a mostly male environment. Once I heard about the undercover cop, I immediately knew it was the supervisor. Surprisingly, initially the supervisor wasn't being considered by most as a likely candidate. I think he quit soon after it became common knowledge that a cop was on the premises. Next story. Kind of the opposite, but there was this one guy who moved to my town from Laguna Beach around the time Laguna Beach had a show on MTV, and unfortunately for him, he just looked like a short adult trying to look like a teen. Everyone assumed he was a cop and called him narc and wouldn't invite him to any parties. I sat next to him in pottery, and of course he was just a chill 16-year-old. We became kind of friends and hung out for a while. He even showed me what whippets were once. Poor Steven. Next story. The woman they sent to mine was pretty obvious. I was in the troubled kids class anyways. She walked in with some story that she moved here from Akron, Ohio, but she was trying way too hard. Like to the point of trying to be like me before the morning was over. I was the only female in the class. Talked with a couple of friends about it during my daily lunchtime jam session, played guitar. It was better than getting caught smoking at the Wendy's across the street. And they all said they had seen her and something was off and avoid her. When I was getting ready to leave at the end of the day, she and 2 other male imposters hopped into an unmarked law enforcement vehicle. Glad I trusted my instincts. Next story. I don't think my school did, probably because it would have been pointless. I went to a more ethnically and economically diverse high school in the district, the other 2 being mostly white and wealthier. So we had the reputation for being the bad school, despite the fact that our academics, sports, and even performing arts program were all regularly rated higher than any of theirs, with the sole exception of the marching band. But that was only because our band director wasn't into the competitive marching scene. Anyway, during my 4 years there, the local PD brought the sniffer dogs through regularly. In fact, a little too regularly for there to not be some kind of racial element to it, of which we were all aware. They never found anything though, except the one time when a dog sat down and made his gesture by a freshman girl's locker. There was a hamburger in there that she just had brought for lunch. She got a traumatic, scared straight experience because of a freaking hamburger. Meanwhile, at the other high schools in the district, it seemed like every semester a kid was getting arrested for selling hard drugs out of their car during school hours or something crazy like that. Next story. Well, he had slept with an older sibling of one of the current students. Dude literally lasted 1 day before word got out and they pulled him. Maybe they sent someone else and we never found out, but New Orleans is a pretty small town. Everybody knows everybody. And if we don't know who you are, we sure as heck aren't buying or selling drugs with you. Next story. My senior year in high school, I had an unremarkable male transfer student from out of state suddenly appear in a couple of my classes. I remember we started talking one day, sitting outside a classroom waiting for the teacher to arrive. Eventually, the conversation turned to him asking if I could score him some weed. He was pretty persistent, so much so that at one point I jokingly asked him if he was a narc. He pretended to not know what the word meant. We became pretty friendly, sat tougher in class, etc., but we never hung outside of school. Weeks later, word broke that dozens of kids had been caught in a huge school-wide bust. My school had roughly 2,500 students, and just like that, this kid disappeared. I was clearly targeted, and I was never entirely sure why. I certainly knew students who sold it, but then again, a lot of people knew them. Next story. No, it was the mid-90s, and she was literally like an 80s after-school special. She wore a freaking acid-washed denim jacket and black sunglasses in the school. I was more surprised that none of my peers knew. They made a whole spectacle of arresting students at school and then putting them in leg shackles. She approached all the kids she thought were using drugs, including me, and asked them where she could score. I apparently was the only person who said, "I don't know you, and I have no idea." My friends that got arrested were charged with aiding and abetting for just saying crap like, "I don't know, maybe ask blank." This is very similar to that other one. Apparently the answer to do you have drugs or know where to get drugs is always no and just no. That would have gotten me in a lot of trouble. My natural instinct is to just deflect. I don't even know why. It's not just to send you on a wild goose chase, per se. I also don't know where to get drugs. Hardest thing I've ever done is ibuprofen. But I'd still go, I don't know, ask that guy. Be careful out there, young Padawans. Next story. All the teachers knew. He didn't do work, he looked too old, it was the 80s, and he didn't dress right. The guy was seen talking to cops in the smoking area. I told you, this was the 80s. When students started talking about him being a narc openly, we were told not to when he wasn't there. I think the school was trying to keep him from what a bad job he was doing of fitting in. Next story. Once experienced the opposite. I was a new teacher to a particular school and kept seeing a kid on campus who I thought could be a narc. The guy had the face of Andrew Garfield and the hair of Kenny G and was tall AF. I finally asked a friend in my department describing the kid, and they told me, oh yeah, that's colleague in the math department, sons as so-and-so. Kid was 16, going on 23, but longtime colleagues and students knew him since he was a youngster. Interesting, with Kenny G's hair, I get told every day I look like Andrew Garfield, and I think it's a compliment, except one guy who followed up with, I hate Andrew Garfield, so that one didn't make me feel great. It also didn't help that I was doing a bad impression of his Spider-Man. Gwen! Next story. There was a guy who showed up out of nowhere in 10th grade. Drove a motorcycle to school, had a little V mustache, generally looked a little older. People would call him a narc or whatever. Mind you, I was personally slinging some bags of drugs to other kids at the time. One day there were 2 missing students from history class, the kid everyone called Narc, and the unsuspecting girl that no one ever noticed. Turns out she was the narc and busted the other dude for trying to buy drugs. Next story. He showed up partway through the school year in marching band. He didn't play an instrument, and they didn't make him learn the field show. He just marched parade with us holding a flag. This made him part of the drum line, which were all the problem kids. This guy seemed older than he was supposed to be. He was way too clean cut, straight-laced to hang with the kids in the drum line, but he would only talk to them. He was very clearly trying to get in with them. He very quickly got the nickname Narc, and all of us would call him that to his face. Then before the year ended, he stopped coming to school, and so did 2 of the other kids in the drum line. Marching band folks, is this a common thing? Are the drumline kids the problem children of the group, or is this just for this story? My mother was in the marching band, but she was an absolute goody two-shoes, but she played the flute. Next story. Picture this. 2003. Mid-sized suburb of a large city. New girl transfers in, sophomore class. Just my son's type, baby face, petite, stringy mouse brown hair, goth eyeliner, wore hoodies and baggy cargo pants. My son was devastated when she turned him down for the winter dance. A month later, he comes home visibly shaken. She was an undercover cop. As she walked out of the high school with uniformed cops and 3 in handcuffs, she saw him and said, "If you were 10 years older, I would have gone out with you." She easily passed as a 15-year-old sophomore. Next story. When a guy who looked clearly too old to be a normal college student was going up and down the dorm halls, poking his head into every room with an open door, asking if we knew where he could get some stuff because he wanted to party. It seemed pretty dang obvious what was going on. He didn't seem appreciative when I told him there was a party supply store a couple of miles away and exactly where it was. Next story. Not at school, but I used to hang out at a lot of all-ages clubs and rave parties when I was a teen in the early 90s. Some friends and I were once on a lot of acid after a rave club closed and unable to get home because the guy who drove us there was tripping too hard. These 2 guys, who we had seen in the club earlier that night, were hanging around and offered to take us to a Denny's to hang out. Now, I was very high, but I knew things were just off with these 2. They kept asking us who our dealer was because they wanted a score just as well. And for 2 guys from out of town, they seemed to be awfully familiar with our waitress. After a while, I confronted them and asked directly if they were narcs, which they denied. My friend, who was tripping way harder than me, finally relented and blurted out the name of the guy we'd bought the drugs from, and like that, the 2 guys were suddenly finished with us and offered to drive us home. I recall that the waitress also comped our whole order. Not long after, I was telling the story of our night tripping in a Denny's with some possible narcs to a friend of mine whose dad was a cop. I described the 2 guys to my friend, and he knew both of them because they were friends with his dad. One of the guys even used to come by the house and throw around a football from time to time with my friend when he was a few years younger. Next story. Was at a house party once that was advertised as a rave. Not crapping you, the dude walks up and says, "Excuse me, gentlemen, but do you know where I could find any narcotic substances?" My buddy replies, "Yeah, dude, I think they made some coffee in the house." Needless to say, we were not busted. Next story. This kid they sent in looked like he was 25 at the minimum. He came in after Christmas break and no one knew who he was. He was clean cut and dressed like an adult thinks a kid would dress. he immediately gravitated to the heads, as we were called, short for drug heads, and I was one of those heads. He asked everyone where he could get some and tried to figure out where we would be having a party at, and not one of us was dumb enough to tell him anything. He earned the nickname of Narc on day 1, and after 2 weeks, he was gone. That meme with Steve Buscemi with the hat and the skateboard saying, "Hey, fellow kids," reminds me of him. Dude stuck out like a sore thumb, and it was comical. If that meme existed in the 80s, we would have had t-shirts made just for that guy. Next story. Senior year. I was in the middle of a math final when my mom walked in. I said, "Whatever it is, I'm in the middle of an exam. Can it wait?" She said no, so I thought my grandma died or something. She won't tell me what's up the whole drive, and she takes me to a restaurant where my older is waiting for us. They still won't tell me what's going on. 5 minutes later, some gentleman joins us. He explains he's a detective, and they found videos of people snorting something with very orange and yellow substances on my phone when I traded it in for an upgrade. They told me he had been monitoring my case, and that there was even a student in my school who was an officer who had been monitoring me for months. I laughed until I cried. The orange substance was Cheez-Its. I recorded some dumb idiots on the bus snorting chopped up Cheez-Its, and they thought it was drugs. I wasn't even the one doing it. Wow, dude. They've been tailing him for months, and that's all they got? By the way, feel free to drop down below in the comments, what is your favorite Cheez-It flavor? I'm going with toasted. Those things are magic for me at the moment. Next story. You will love this. When I was a senior in high school, a kid started in the middle of the year. I would assume he was in his early 20s and maybe got busted for something and was something of an informant. He started hanging out with the known heads, included me and my friends. I am 43 years old, and I didn't realize that something was weird about him until I randomly put 2 and 2 together a couple of years ago. This was like 20 years after. The biggest red flag was his name, Matlock. We had an effing undercover agent named Matlock hanging out with high school students in the late 90s, and I was so oblivious to it. How could we have been so ignorant? Anyway, no one got in trouble, and I do hope he is okay. Next story. Not school and not cops, but in the glorious state of Alabama, Roll Tide. We only have one state provider for liquor and such, ABC Beverages. They like to send underage people to try to buy alcohol so they can bust up other stores, who notably had to purchase their liquor from ABC first, and so are already selling at a higher price. When I was working at another liquor store, they liked to send 19, 20-ish-year-old girls with pretty hair, pretty eyes, etc., and they had a playbook. They would pick out their drink, go to the counter, and do the whole, "Oh, I forgot my wallet in the car," and bat their eyelashes and look sad. This was also next to a college campus, and the sorority girls there had the same playbook, so this happened a lot. My gay self would always say, "That's fine, I can wait," as their womanly wiles would not work on me. Only one ever came back, and she actually had a valid license. All the others just left and did not return. A friend of mine, tired and frayed, got caught by one. It wasn't so much, "Ooh, pretty girl," as it was that he was tired and stressed and just didn't want to argue with a customer. Turns out they were underage, and they were an ABC plant. He got a $1,000 fine, he got fired and blacklisted from the job, and the company had to pay a fine for insufficiently training its employees or some such slap on the wrist. Next story. Not high school, but in college, I got a job doing surveillance on a girl at college bars for a child custody case. The main reason they had me do it was because I was freshly 21, and the guys they kept hiring were 45-year-old cops. She knew she was being followed, and she was figuring it out pretty easy. I met one of the guys once, and it was like your stereotypical movie scene of an older guy trying to be young and cool to blend in. We are pretty sure she caught on to me eventually, but by that time, my own college classes were starting up again, so it didn't matter too much. It was a weird summer. Next story. There was a kid who was transferred to my high school in like his senior year, and as far as I know, he was just a normal kid. Except, this otherwise normal kid had some sort of early onset male pattern baldness, and he looked like he was 37, and they called him Narc all the time. The one the smart stoners looked out for was the weird guy who actually was a teenager, maybe. that somehow only went to our school for like a month and never stopped asking where he could get a score. Next story. Our narc was almost 30 and no one caught him at all. 12 in my class were kept from walking with charges looming. The football coach's nephew was one that got busted. The officer fooled all of us, but it was the early 90s, so it was easier, I guess. One day we had a new kid to transfer in, and he wasn't a participant in any school activity of any kind. He sat in the back of my geometry class and never spoke, yet somehow was able to bust every smoking kid in our class. Go figure. Next story. Small town and wouldn't give their parents' names or siblings. They never had siblings. Always a new kid and always tried too hard, dressed wrong for the groups that they would try to get into, etc. The new kids. They are always looking around at everything, trying to get a lay of the land. They look a little confused. Cops? They scan a room in a surveillance way. They aren't looking at walls and lockers and pictures and posters, etc. New kids. They are alone the first day or two and kind of quiet. They are just trying to find their way around. They look nervous. Cops. They always go for a group way too fast, and they come off trying way too hard. They skip the loner period and seem a little too comfortable, not at all nervous. Short and sweet, new kids. Nervous, reserved, curious, and lost. Cops. Too chill, too curious, more exacting, a little nosy, stiff, and way too eager. They're kind of easy to spot. Next story. While on staff at a major university, I went to use the freeze dryer one day and there was a cop and a dirtbag biker type sitting next to each other in the hallway. "Professor Blank?" asked the cop. "Nope, I'm just in early that day. He comes in later. I had just met him the day prior, taught me how to use the freeze dryer." Later in the day, the tenured professor was arrested for his role in an ecstasy ring. The dirtbag was presumably the undercover. I don't know why he was there with the police officer. As an undergrad, I worked through college as a locksmith, and the running joke at safe and vault openings for the police was the dirtiest, grungiest person on scene was the undercover cop. And this guy fit the role. Next story. When I was in school, we had a Junior Explorer program for the police. Like, you could do ride-alongs and sort of got privileged access to other training and essentially was a program to groom you to become a police officer, basically right out of high school. Think ROTC for the cops. Anyway, we all knew the kids that were interested and actively engaged, and they would ask us about what parties we had or were going to have. I ran into another one of these kids in my adult life when a coworker of mine threw a housewarming party. Her little brother was there, and one of them. I had a few beers and was on my way out, and he stops me and asks me which car is mine. I just said one of them and walked away. Poor kid was too scared to follow me down the street to call me in. Next story. During one of my free periods, I always used to do paperwork in our school's main office. One, because the office was right around the corner from the cafeteria, and my lunch was right after fourth period, so it was super convenient. And two, because it was quiet and I could actually relax for a while without having to put up with other kids or teachers. One day, this guy comes up and buzzes into the office. I graduated in 2019, so post-Columbine, and he lets in, and our secretary immediately gives him some paperwork to fill out, and the principal came out of his office to escort him to class. The guy was obviously in his mid to late 20s and was wearing these skin-tight jeans from Hollister and some stupid orange V-neck shirt. I went to high school in an affluent suburb, but I grew up in the inner city, so I knew immediately what was up. I didn't think anything of it. Then right before the last period of the day, a couple of friends and I decided we were going to skip our last class. And we met up by this one vending machine, and there he was. He looked up at us, smirking, and said, "You guys know anyone that's got any of the, ganja?" And I said, "Thanks for all you do to protect us, officer," and then we never saw him again. So I think he knew his cover was blown. Next story. They were super uncomfortable and wore flannel in a way that was not in. Plus, all they wanted to talk about was buying drugs. I feel bad for the kids who gave into the pressure, and honestly, it should have all been thrown out. I only ran into one of the two if I recall correctly, so not sure about the other one. It was unsettling and a huge waste of tax money in my opinion. Next story. Article about her in the local paper with her picture. The piece was about infiltrating one of the local schools to bust drugs. She was at my school about a week and was basically a big laughingstock. Everyone was like, "Nice picture in the paper," and she would claim to not know what we were talking about. I guess they thought only adults would read the paper. It was just a huge embarrassment. One of my friends did have a conspiracy theory that it was all intentional and that a second real undercover cop was at our school, but nobody else seemed suspicious. Oh my gosh, what a ploy! Have a very fake, obvious undercover cop only to take more attention away from the real one doing the sleuthing. Cops in the comments, take notice. This is genius. Drug users in the comments, beware. Or legally, maybe I should say, kids don't do drugs at all. Next story. This was back in the 90s. We knew when the cop showed up today, not dressed as a kid, but dressed in uniform. Lots of jaws dropped as he walked past the cafeteria. This was after yearbook pictures were submitted to, so when we all got our yearbooks at the end of the year, he was in there. It was crazy how young he looked in the photo. Next story. Guy showed up to a huge house party wearing ill-fitting jeans and a brown windbreaker. Couldn't have looked more like a cop if he tried. I told one of the hosts, and they were like, "Yeah, we know. If you know anyone underage, tell them to leave." 30 minutes later, 20 uniformed cops showed up to bust the party, detained all 75 of us, and made us show the ID one by one. I was slightly snarky to them, and they threatened me with arrest. I was of age, and the whole situation was extremely stupid. Busted! Or not really, but threatened with being busted. Also, a brown windbreaker might sound like it would add beautifully to my clothing. I don't really know fashion at all. People in the comments, is that in? Could I pull it off? I know it's not that kind of channel, but still, fashion advice appreciated. Also, that concludes our stories of undercover cops trying to stick in but ending up sticking out. If you guys have any stories of cops sticking out like sore thumbs at your school, feel free to drop those down below in the comments as well, because they're all very silly and all very fun. And as always, thanks for hanging out with me, and we will see you in the next one. Bye-bye!